Hello, and welcome to Griddy Film's first Nitty Gritty review. Today we're going to be discussing the 2017 blockbuster hit Wonder Woman. This is a superhero movie directed by Patty Jenkins and written by Alan Heinberg. It's starring Gal Gadot and Chris Pine and is rated PG-13 for sequences of violence and action and some suggestive content. If you haven't seen this movie yet, it's kind of like if the movies Thor and Captain America had a baby that grew up in this DC cinematic universe instead of the Marvel universe. I think that's fair. So in this review, I'm going to go through the grid that I use to rate movies and delve into the nitty-gritty of why I rated this movie the way I did. This review is going to contain some spoilers, but if you want a spoiler-free review, feel free to check out the Wonder Woman spoiler-free review. The first category on my grid is genre. I think one of the biggest differences between DC superhero movies and Marvel superhero movies is that the Marvel superhero movies tend to take another popular genre and blend it with the superhero movie. For example, Ant-Man is a heist movie that also happens to be a superhero movie. With Wonder Woman, that's pretty much just a straight superhero movie. It doesn't really have any interesting twists, and it definitely does stick to some of the superhero tropes of the genre. None of them are glaringly obvious or obnoxious. It doesn't quite verge on stereotypical, so there's nothing too negative about it, but it didn't get any extra points on my grid either. Now, where world building is concerned, it definitely got a few extra points. You have Themyscira in the beginning. That has a really interesting mix of kind of a comic book vibe mixed with Greek mythology. It feels somehow ancient and modern at the same time. It's just a really well-developed world. And of course, we'll get more into this a little bit later, but the cast that they assembled to be the Amazons was just extremely well done. And then, of course, you have all of the World War I. It feels almost like a war movie, but still is very much so a superhero movie, as opposed to the obvious comparison of Captain America, which was very much a war movie that happened to have more superhero stuff in it. So I just thought the world building in general was really well thought out. The attention to detail is amazing. Just looking at the scenes gives you a really good feel for the world that we're in. And they also did a really good job of differentiating it from those Marvel movies that it undoubtedly is kind of just by its nature draw comparison to. Overall, for genre, I gave it a 5.33 out of 10, which I consider to be pretty close to average. 5.0 in my book would be average. So it gets a C for genre. It's not bad, but it doesn't really do anything super great to tilt it into the A or B range either. The next category in the grid is going to be writing. The first thing I usually think about when I think about the writing is the protagonist of the film. And if you've ever read Blake Snyder's Save the Cat, he talks a lot about how a protagonist needs an inner need and an outer goal. Wonder Woman is a really good example of a movie where the protagonist has a very strong outer goal without much or any of an inner need. She starts off wanting to help mankind. She hears there's a war. She wants to go fight Ares and end the war. And it's not as far as outer goals go, it's not bad, and it's very clearly defined, and as superheroes need a villain to fight. But what I disliked is that she didn't have much of an inner need. It would have been nice to see her show some homesickness for Themyscira, or missing her mother, or even maybe guilt for the fact that she kills her brother at the end of the movie, some sort of internal struggle that would help define her character arc and show some more character growth. Instead, we get a lot of external conflicts, like, say, finding the right dress, which takes a very long time. I wouldn't be surprised if that scene was almost as long as the final fight scene at the end. It's ridiculous. It was just too long. It was just too long. I kind of would have liked it a lot more if Steve Trevor was right, if there wasn't anyone to blame. Mankind is just kind of messed up. It would have been nice for her to realize that without being proven right. I wanted to see her being proved wrong. I think Thor, talking about that movie again, is a really good example where he started off the movie extremely flawed, and became worthy. Whereas in Wonder Woman, she has to learn to realize that even though mankind doesn't deserve her, she'll save them anyway. She's gonna offer her unconditional love, whether we deserve it or not. Just yet another character in the DC universe that's gonna have a god complex, so I guess there's that. It's still a very entertaining movie. She's an extremely likable character throughout. You root for her even though you really don't doubt she's gonna win. Overall, I gave the writing 5.6 out of 10, slightly above average. I consider it about a C+. The next category in my grade is going to be the editing. The special effects in this film are particularly impressive. If you go through and look at any behind-the-scenes footage or photographs of the film and realize just how much green screen there is. I guess it's not that surprising of a feat in this day and age. It's extremely common, but it's still impressive and still worth noting. The fight scenes really stood out as being some of the best I've seen in a superhero movie in a while. Had kind of a comic booky feel without taking over the whole look and feel of the movie. And then there were also, interspersed within almost all of the fight scenes, you would get occasional, just awesome facial expressions from Gal Gadot that just gave that character so much more personality and just badassness. Editing overall got an 8.4 out of 10, which I consider to be an A-. Well above average, not quite perfect, but still very strong. The next category in my grade is going to be the sound design. The sound design in general was perfect in my book. The sound effects were natural and intense when they needed to be, and then of course the score was perfect. It's got a playfulness to it at times, it's got a badassness to it at times, has a sweetness to it at times. It's just a very well-balanced score that really complemented the movie well, and I gave the sound design in general, that includes score, soundtrack, sound effects, sound mix, all that good stuff, I gave it a 10 out of 10. The next category is going to be acting and casting. When I first heard that Gal Gadot was cast to be Wonder Woman, this was well before Batman vs. Superman came out, of course, I saw pictures of her and I just didn't get it. She just didn't look like the Wonder Woman that I had envisioned. And then, of course, Batman vs. Superman came out, and she was pretty much by far the best thing in that movie. I was still a little bit skeptical since she didn't have too much screen time in Batman vs. Superman, and most of that screen time was as Wonder Woman as opposed to as Diana. But, of course, like everyone else in the world, she won me over in Wonder Woman. I mean, she's perfect. She just has a really good balance of strength and confidence mixed with a certain kind of naivete almost, and just a gentleness and a kindness. And I feel like it's really hard for some reason to balance those things, but because she has that kind of duality in her performance, it just really helps bring that character to life in ways that the script maybe wasn't able to. I also really loved Robin Wright in this movie, and I thought the casting choice of casting the Princess Bride as the warrior leader of the Amazons was a really interesting choice that was not only good because she's a good actor and she fit the role, but it also has a cultural relevance and importance that I found really interesting. And then we have the actual Amazons themselves. They cast a lot of athletes and they trained for like 5 months, I think, and they were just real badass women doing their thing, and I thought that was really cool. I also liked that they were a diverse group of women and that they were a little bit older than you would expect in a movie like this. It not only made sense narratively, since Diana would be the youngest of all the Amazons, but it was just nice to see that they didn't cast a bunch of, 20-year-old women to be the extras there. Like, it was just authentic. For acting and casting, I gave the total an 8.86 out of 10, which I consider to be a solid A. The next category in my grade is going to be directing and cinematography. There's a lot of rumors going around that Wonder Woman is getting campaigned around the Oscar circuit. A lot of rumors that it could be the first superhero movie to get a Best Picture nomination, which I actually would be not super excited about. However, I would love to see Patty Jenkins get nominated as Best Director for Wonder Woman. I think it's incredibly impressive the way Patty Jenkins was able to take the semiological idea of Wonder Woman and use that throughout the film to create these feelings of empowerment and unity and inspiration that aren't really present in the script itself. There was just just that feeling of Wonder Woman as a symbol without objectifying her or turning her only into a symbol. She still had an identity of her own. She still had a personality. She still had agency, but also served as a symbol. And I think it was very well done, and I think that it has cultural importance. Yeah, and I think Patty Jenkins really deserves a lot of credit for being able to pull out those feelings without knocking you over the head or just being way too obvious about it. And I really think it would be pretty awesome if she got nominated for Wonder Woman for an Academy Award. Do I think it's likely? As far as the cinematography goes, I thought it did a really good job of balancing realism versus the storytelling aspects of a superhero story that isn't necessarily going to be realistic all the time. And it also was just beautiful and did a really good job of setting the mood throughout the film. All in all, I gave the directing and cinematography an 8.67, which again I consider about an A-. The next category in my grid I call character aesthetics. This includes hair, makeup, costumes. And this movie came pretty close to perfect. Costumes, for sure, perfect. And again, it does a really good job of balancing the more superhero fantasy aspects, particularly on Themyscira, and then jumping into the World War I scenes. You have the really good visual comparison of Wonder Woman in her armor versus all of the war uniforms of the time. Just the attention to detail is phenomenal, and I mean, there's just no arguing. The costumes were amazing. Overall, the character aesthetics, I gave an 8.67. The next category on my grid I refer to as environmental aesthetics. This is going to be your props, sets, locations. As far as the props go, again, the attention to detail is phenomenal. The whole town of Veld in that scene was all a set, which I did not realize. I just kind of assumed they had found a location that they were able to make look a little bit war-torn. And then when I was watching the special features on the DVD, I realized that they had just built from scratch this whole town. But the scene at the end, I really felt like they could have maybe gone a little above and beyond to make it just a little bit more visually appealing or a little bit more unique. The location just felt very generic, and there was nothing really that stood out as particularly unique or cool or just different from other superhero movies. It just felt very generic. I gave the environmental aesthetics a 9.33, which I consider to be a solid A. Still not quite perfect, but even a little bit more above average than some of the other categories we've seen so far. The next category in my grid is going to be impact on film. Now this is a little bit harder to judge for newer films, just because they haven't been out long enough to really see a clear impact on film. However, I think it's pretty easy, particularly with this movie, to give a good basis on where it lies. So there are 3 different categories that I give for this. The first is going to be cult impact, and I think it's pretty obvious that this movie is going to have a strong cult impact. If nothing else, just because Wonder Woman herself has always had a cult impact, and this was actually a pretty good movie that features her. So I think that this movie is going to have a lasting impact within the fandom of superhero movies in general and Wonder Woman in particular. That said, I do think this movie is far more revered right now than it probably will be in the future, mostly because everybody had such low expectations for it before it came out. The next category, as far as impact on film, is going to be the history of the film. Pretty much no matter how it goes from here, I mean, it's the highest budgeted movie ever directed by a woman, and the biggest box office hit ever directed by a woman, and the first hit superhero movie to feature a woman. A lot of people thought this one wouldn't be successful because of that, and it blew away expectations. Pretty much no matter how you look at it, it broke records, it broke barriers, and I do think it's going to have a place in history for that reason. And the last category I have within the impact on film is going to be the inspirational impact. And what I mean by that is, how likely is this movie to inspire future filmmakers? Obviously, this is much easier to judge based on older movies where you can see if there's been an impact or not. But with this movie, I kind of don't think there's going to be a huge impact on film overall. I think we were likely to start seeing more female leads in movies and likely to see more women behind the camera, which is awesome, and I'm looking forward to that. But as far as genre conventions go or style, things like that, I don't think it's super likely to make a big difference in the genre. All in all, as far as impact on film goes, I gave this movie an 8.0, which is an A- in my book. The last category in my grid is going to be overall enjoyment. And for this one, I gave it an 8.0 out of 10. It was well above average. Not a perfect movie, though. I definitely had fun watching it, but was also aware of some of the flaws as I was watching it. So it's a little bit of a give and take, but I definitely enjoyed it, and I definitely recommend it. I also have a category of extra credit, where I will give up to 5 points for kind of silly reasons. And with this movie, I gave it 3 points of extra credit. The first one was simply for being a movie that exceeded my expectations. Usually I go into a movie pretty confident if I will either like it or not. And with this one, I didn't even want to see it in theaters at first because I was so confident it was going to be awful. And then the good reviews started rolling in, and I got my hopes up a little bit, but I was still really hesitant. And then when I got out of the theater for the first time, I was really surprised. So I gave it's kind of a silly reason to give a movie extra credit, just for not sucking. But, I mean, in this case, with the reputation that DC had, and how much I wanted to like this movie but didn't think I would, it was a really good feeling to walk out of that movie and be like, hey, that didn't suck. The second point of extra credit I gave for being a movie that my inner child really enjoyed. I grew up watching Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman and Super Friends on Cartoon Network, and watching the old Tim Burton Batman movies. I mean, I thought those were just the coolest things I had ever seen, and then just imagining myself at like 7 or 8 years old seeing Wonder Woman, that would have been amazing. So to be able to imagine myself being that age watching this movie just really put me in touch with those memories in a way that I had kind of forgotten about, and that I wasn't expecting that movie to bring out, which was just really fun. So I definitely gave it a point of extra credit. The third point of extra credit is for being such a fun movie that I saw it in theaters 3 times. I'm not usually the type of person that sees movies multiple times in theaters, and I'm also the type of person that, if you haven't been able to tell already, tends to fixate on the script. But this movie made me not care that much that there were things with the script that I didn't like, and that's really rare. So I gave it a point of extra credit just for being fun enough and enjoyable enough that it was something I could go back to again and again and still have fun. Overall, I gave Wonder Woman an 83.86%, which I consider to be an A-. Unless you, for some reason, hate superhero movies, you're probably gonna enjoy it. It's not perfect, and it's not as good as a lot of the Marvel movies, but it's definitely better than any of the other DC movies we've seen so far, and even aside from that, it's fun, it holds its own, it's just entertaining and worth watching. Thank you for watching the Nitty Gritty Wonder Woman review. If you liked what you saw, be sure to subscribe to Griddy Films on YouTube, and you can follow Griddy Films on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. There's also a Griddy Films Patreon account if you'd like to check that out. All of the social media accounts are linked on the YouTube description for this video, as well as on the Griddy Films website at griddyfilms.com. Thanks again for watching, and don't forget to like and share this video if you liked what you saw.